Since its release back in 2005, Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, or PJKKTOGOTM for short, has become renowned for being something unexpectedly special and unique. It certainly shakes off that dreaded movie game stereotype and stands on its own as a game that many fans, myself included, actually think is better than the film it's based on, and it's worth exploring just why that is. How did it all come together so well, and why exactly is it so remarkable? First, cast your mind back to 2004, just after the Lord of the Rings trilogy came out. Peter Jackson was instantly a household name. He was as industry heavyweight as it gets, and studios were willing to give him hundreds of millions to make anything he wanted, which is exactly what he set out to do with King Kong, remaking his favorite childhood movie with an indulgent 3-hour epic. Jackson also enjoys himself some video games. You might remember he was once signed on to make a Halo movie that never came out, and in January of 2004, while he was in LA to receive his hundreds of Oscars for Return of the King, he was personally shopping around meeting with video game publishers for King Kong. Despite EA's Lord of the Rings games being so well received, Jackson apparently wasn't that happy with them and wanted to be more involved with their production. During this time, Jackson and his team met up with Ubisoft, where he met French designer Michel Ancel, creator of Rayman and Beyond Good and Evil, both of which have very distinct and vivid styles with some outside-of-the-box gameplay. Like Jackson, Ancel himself is like a visionary creative auteur type, and the King Kong game is as much Michel Ancel's King Kong as it is Peter Jackson's. As the story goes, Ancel and Jackson hit it off immediately, bantering about video games, with Jackson actually being a big fan of Beyond Good and Evil. He also came in with a decent idea of what he wanted for his game, with gameplay jumping between you surviving Skull Island as screenwriter Jack Driscoll, who you might remember as Adrian Brody's character from the film, but I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, and wreaking havoc as Kong himself. Ubisoft would fly over teams from France to New Zealand during the course of the film's production. They were provided plenty of assets and art to use, and even most of the film's stars lend their voice to the game, like Brody, Jack Black, and Naomi Watts. All assets in the game had to be approved by Jackson's team, who were very demanding about fidelity, much to the developers at Ubisoft's frustration. I feel that this was all worth pointing out because in my time covering licensed games on this channel, a lot of the best also maintained this close collaboration, and it's even rarer for these games that a film's director gets explicitly involved with production, even if he was just an ideas man. What's more unusual is Jackson himself was set to receive a percentage of the game's profits, which is a near unheard of arrangement for movie games, and this is complete speculation, but it's reasonably safe to theorize that he was bankrolling at least a bit of the development costs in return, because his production company Wingnut Films has its own splash screen and shares the same space on the back of the case as Universal and Ubisoft. Since day one, Jackson stressed that he wanted the game to be immersive, and the game's marketing rolled with it. Immersive was the buzzword pre-release. They also used the word cinematic a lot just to complete the combo. Now, I know immersive has been thrown around so much that it's near meaningless, but here it genuinely seems like it was at the core of basically every design decision. It's always trying to get you past that fourth wall. Most obviously, there's almost no cutscenes as it keeps you in first person like Half-Life, and there's no heads-up display at all, not even a crosshair or an ammo counter. Instead, press a button at any time to hear Adrian Brody say how much ammo he has left.
Last magazine on backup.
It's a bit gimmicky, sure, but having him not say the exact amount of rounds he has left gives you something to keep track of in the back of your mind. It's a small way of putting you in his head and thinking like he would, and you can turn on an on-screen ammo counter and a crosshair in the options menu if you want to, but that just feels all wrong. It's nice to have the screen cleared up to show off what were really impressive graphics back in 2005. Even though this was released on like everything at the time, the version you're seeing is the 360 version, which was a launch title, and with its god rays, water reflections, ragdoll physics, fancy skeletal animation, fire effects, bloom effects, fog effects, the list goes on, this really did push the bar at the time. Obviously it's dated now, the human models in particular are a bit horrifying, and bloom gets ramped up to 10 all the time because it's 2005, but the strong visual direction of the film is carried over, and the way the game at times frames nice backgrounds or slows you down in the water to force your perspective is clever, and the dense rocky jungle feels handcrafted. Good graphics and no heads-up display isn't why King Kong stands out though, not really, even if it was fairly unique at the time. Instead, we gotta look at things a little closer. Through most of the game, we're joined by varying members of the cast of the movie, and to keep up the pace, they're constantly bantering as if this were an Uncharted game, only it obviously came out a couple of years earlier. It's surprisingly well done, they react to their surroundings quickly and well, and there's one point where where a character makes fun of you for counting your ammo out loud, which I absolutely love.
Counting out loud? Or maybe you want to attract more of those things.
Things get particularly interesting in combat because the AI are far less scripted. Teammates can die, which is an instant game over, so you will need to save them when they scream for help, but in return they're okay at fighting. They'll yell out when there's an enemy on your left, right, or behind you, and you can interact with them with a silly Oblivion-esque close-up to ask for their weapons or just ask them how they're doing. They'll drag each other to safety, help each other up, let you know when they have a weapon you can use, grab their own spears from the environment, including ones you've thrown, and it's all unscripted, giving the combat a very sort of dynamic flowing energy, which is matched by the enemy AI behaviors that are all distinct depending on which dinosaur or giant insect or giant crab you're up against. Some dinosaurs will retreat a bit after being hit. You'll see dinosaurs attacking each other or eating each other's carcasses. The millipedes will creep up and down the walls. Again, it's all very dynamic. It's like you're playing in a simulation rather than a shooting gallery. And you can't help but care about your teammates at least a little bit, if only for their usefulness. And you can't help but find Jack Black annoying for his uselessness as the greedy capitalist filmmaker who's usually trying to film the monsters rather than help, which is clearly by design and in line with what our character would be feeling. The characters are also well realized, and it does feel like you're surviving alongside them. After you're super used to having them around, the game expectedly throws you into situations alone where you'll really realize how much you miss them. When even simple intuitive things like looking at them to see where they're looking to find out where enemies are can't be done, it gets a lot more stressful and disorienting, especially when you get snuck up on. These nice little emergent moments happen naturally throughout the game, and notice how the horror movie style audio builds atmosphere with the tense music and breathing. It adopts a lot from survival horror video games too. You're always low on ammunition, you move slowly, you need to hide from the bigger dinosaurs, and you're always only a couple of quick hits away from dying to any enemy. You feel very vulnerable. Rather than the combat being a series of hallways, it's instead a series of arenas to give the AI breathing room, and in these arenas there'll generally be a mix of places where you can pick up spears, enclosures to take cover in, walls to hide behind, fire sources, insects you can use as bait, and tall grass or scrub that can burn. If you melee attack a fire with a spear, it'll come alight for you to spread more fire. Pretty much all of the simple puzzles involve clearing a path with the fire. Because you're constantly running out of ammo, spears become the main weapon in the game, and you'll be keeping track of where these spears are around you as well as all the cover you can use. You can't outrun enemies, so instead you're constantly scanning the environment looking for ways to stay alive, which is so instinctive that it goes back to that whole immersion thing as you're thinking like you're in the world. You're basically doing what your character would be doing, running, hiding, and desperately using everything around you while making judgment calls on whether you can fang it into the open to where the spears are, or just spend that precious ammunition instead. On top of all this, the fire mechanics give it all a much needed layer of depth. Eventually you figure out that you can throw a spear with bait on it into a scrub, dinosaurs will take the bait, and then you can burn that scrub to burn the dinosaur. Of course, you need to have 2 spears, bait, and a fire to pull it all off, which just means more subconscious scanning of everything around you. You can even kill other monsters like the bat things, and if their corpse falls into the bushes, dinosaurs will go for the corpse, and then again you can burn the dinosaur. Now, I know on paper this is all fairly simple. I wouldn't blame you for thinking that any of this sounds particularly outstanding, and though it does touch on some neat emergent stuff with the AI and the fire, it's definitely nowhere near as complex as a full-blown immersive sim like your System Shocks or Deus Exes, and it certainly feels weird to even compare this to those games, but it captures a taste of the simulation-style combat that those games strive on without any of the stat building or complex inventory management or dialogue trees. Rather than this being an RPG, it's instead framed as an easily accessible 6-hour-long linear first-person shooter. And being that, from the get-go, it almost instantly just cuts the fat and lulls you into its world and rhythm. From the fire sources to your ammo count to how your teammates are doing, it's not hard to lose yourself to King Kong when you're keeping track of so much in its universe, especially when there's no video gamey barriers like an inventory or a skill tree or even a heads-up display to pull you out of it. It all synergizes really well, and as cliche as this sounds, it really is greater than the sum of its parts. So when the occasional heavily scripted sequence happens, like some of the T-Rex sequences, because it invites you into its world so well, these bits are elevated so much. One of the most memorable has two T-Rexes chasing you down a river on a raft, and you've got to keep attacking them to hold them off. At the time, this was absolutely something to marvel at graphically, but it still holds up super well thanks to the visual design, the music, and of course all the immersion stuff. Another example is the Brontosaurus stampede, which you might remember in the movie as that awful CGI scene where characters were kicking dinosaurs in the face and running as fast as them, but in the game, when you're placed into this world in first person, it's again just so much more effective. Unfortunately, the game breaks you out of its rhythm way too often. Sometimes it's technical stuff like the plethora of loading screens, the occasional glitch where something won't trigger and you'll need to reload, or the dodgy frame rate. Of course, you can just play it on PC, but that has its own problems. We'll get to that in a second. Other times, it's logically a bit questionable, like every time you come across a weapons crate, you're meant to buy that there's a guy flying around in a seaplane, somehow tracking where you are and dropping crates on your path ahead. In any other game, this wouldn't be a big deal, but for a game selling itself on immersion, it does pull you out a bit. Also, I know how nitpicky this is, but surely bones don't burn like this or this easily. Compared to the film, the game vaguely follows the same plot points, but it takes its liberties with stuff like the plane, which wasn't in the movie at all. The absolute worst, most interruptive parts come when you switch to third person and play as King Kong, where it boils down to a mix of horribly unresponsive button mashing, bad linear, also unresponsive platforming, and some frustrating fixed camera angles. Clearly it was a spectacle at the time, so I'm sure back then it was much more forgivable. In fact, when I played this back then, I don't remember these bits being so bad, but they just reek of being thrown in because you can't have a King Kong game where you don't play as King Kong. You spend about a quarter of the game as him, mostly near the end, and it doesn't get any better as it goes along. For a game built on immersion, Kong has a very video gamey rage mode, and you often fight with Naomi Watts unrealistically swinging around in your hand, though I guess the movie did that too, which bothered me there as well. Also, it insists on breaking its own no cutscenes rule almost every time a Kong section starts, and the cutscenes that are here are shockingly awkward.
Ed! Get back down! You'll be killed! No! Keep your hands off her!
Of course, at the end, you play the New York City finale as Kong, and things get even worse in the ugly, empty city streets with a completely rushed final segment that leaves the game on a flat note. Even the usual poor standards of the Kong sections completely fall off a cliff here, or fall off the Empire State Building, I should say. I think it could have been really interesting to have only seen Kong from the human perspective. I feel like they could have really shown off how much of a scary wrecking ball he is when you're looking up at him, but even the run-ins you do have with Kong as a human are surprisingly sedated. You only really see him in glimpses or when he's asleep. They were trying to go for some sort of like duality where both Adrian Brody and Kong had the same motivations, trying to save and protect Naomi Watts, but when the Kong sections are not only unfun, but also very disconnected from the human sections, it doesn't have much of an effect. As a human, you don't even visit areas where you play or played as Kong. It would have been cool to see the destruction he caused afterwards in the next level. Instead, Kong may as well be on another island somewhere. It's funny to think that the worst part about the King Kong game is King Kong himself, but it's true, they just happen to make a surprisingly innovative survival FPS around him. And at only 6 hours outside of some bonus unlockable content like an alternative ending, it's still worth experiencing that FPS today. Also, just as an aside, I love it when games have an in-game museum to show off all the art and assets, though I do wish the ones here were bigger. Actually playing this these days is a bit of a nightmare though. Ignoring handhelds, there's two main versions of the game, the 360 version, which you've been seeing, and the PS2, GameCube, Xbox version, which is still pretty good. Weirdly, both versions were ported to PC. Initially it was just the PS2 game ported, which you don't want, not only because it's uglier, but also because it has horrible Star Force DRM, and later the 360 game was ported as a download-only purchase, which of course is now unavailable to buy. If you can get your hands on it somehow, as nefarious as your methods may be, there's an unofficial 60fps widescreen patch you'll definitely want to install, but I had absolutely no luck with it and had permanent screen tearing issues no matter what I did. Most people don't seem to have too many problems though, it seems, so maybe it's worth a shot. Otherwise, just grab it on 360 if you can bear the dodgy frame rate. It even works on Xbox One. As dated as Peter Jackson's King Kong game may be, it still controls like an old console FPS, and as annoying as the Kong bits are, it's still a pretty exceptional game. It deserves its reputation as one of the best movie games ever made, and beyond that, it deserves to be known as a game that stands on its own and pushed the bar forward outside of the licensed video game world. And with that, we wrap up the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. If you want to support, you can click like and subscribe and all that, or you can support on Patreon. And at the end of each of my videos, I thank all my patrons. So thank you to all my patrons. Thank you to all my patrons coming up on the screen. And especially thanks to Adam Beals, Adam Davison, Analog Man, Anthony Gallagher, Anthony Heisel, Big J, Blake Barnett, Boggy Online, Connor Salinas, Cuggles, Devin Grandal, Dominic Chikoki, Dope Pants, Evil Chicken, Gary Pay, Hazardous Kirby, Casey, Kayla, Labcat, Lachlan Jones, Lil Jake, Lockie the French Dude, Lucas Racevic, Maximilian Kunzman, May Aris, Mazaki, Melanie G, Michael Brennan, Minimme prefers shorter Patreon names, Mrs. Minimme, Mustache Duct Tape, Nexus Flipping is Fun, Peaceful Kumquat, Plague, Ritalin for Kids, Guide Panthera, Tia, Terrence Clint, Test Drive Unlimited 2, The Last Great Opium Den, Thomas Damsgaard, Traplaw Ross, Travis, Trevor Corbin, Trixie Emerson, Writing on Games, and Zindictive. Thank you as usual, and thank you all of you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.